Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the 5th of 9 lectures in Sealaska Heritage Institute's Northwest Coast Arts Lecture Series. My name is Jay Zeller. I am a program coordinator here at Sealaska Heritage Institute. This series will feature the work and journeys of Northwest Coast artists and put a spotlight on priority issues and topics concerning Northwest Coast arts. This series is part of SHI's goal to promote cross-cultural understanding. Preston Singletary has been working in glass since 1982 and in formline design since 1988. As a Tlingit tribal member growing up in Seattle, their journey of connecting with his cultural roots has been varied and dynamic. Today, Preston Singletary will discuss Tlingit glass. He will tell the story of his career, describe the connections to his mentors, and show how the material of glass is adding a new dimension to Indigenous art. As you watch the lecture, we invite you to submit questions in the YouTube comments section, and at the end of the lecture, we will ask him your question. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Preston Singletary.
Preston Sayi Tlingit Kenach Kochain Duasak Kagwantanach Etsati Sialkwana Achat. So I'm speaking to you from Seattle, where I live and work, and I grew up here. And I'm going to start sharing my screen here and jump right into the presentation. So you should see my intro slide here with my name. Is that correct? Okay. So yeah, I grew up in Seattle, and you know, the whole glass community basically grew up around me. Well, it's a heavy-handed statement, but the glass community in the 80s was very small, and it's largely grew here in the Seattle area in the Northwest due to the Pilchuck Glass School, which is an international glass school located north of Seattle. But I am from the Kagwantan group from Sitka. My great-grandmother was said to be a descendant of Kaplian. She there's a picture of her here. The woman in the center of the photo was Susie Johnson Bartlett Gubatayo. She was married to George Bartlett, who was killed or died in a sawmill accident in 1919. And in the 20s, then she remarried a Filipino man here named Dionisio Gubatayo. And so because my great-grandmother was part of an arranged marriage at the time, and she was widowed, she did have several children, one including my grandmother, who in turn also married a Filipino man. So technically I'm a Tlingit. And my mother married my father, who was mixed European, basically. So a lot of, you know, diversity in my background. This is my son, who is older now. He's 20. And we also have, this is a photo of some of my extended family, a lot of which my great aunt and uncle, the son and daughter of Dionisio and Susie Johnson Bartlett Gubatayo. They've all passed on now, but they, so I have some of my cousins and my aunties here at an exhibition that I had in Seattle a few years back. This is my father basically doing what he loves to do. He's a very famous fly fisherman. In fact, we get confused for each other often, but he's kind of a famous fly fisherman here in the Northwest in the Seattle area, fly tyer. And this is my mother, who, so I like to attribute a lot of my, you know, artistic creativity based on my parents, because my father was a great outdoorsman, but he also, he worked for Boeing for about 40 years, but he ended up also, he dabbled in a lot of things, and soapstone carving and oil painting, and he's very well read. And my mother and father both played Delta blues, and this is an old Gibson guitar, a very classic from about 1909, called The Gibson. So my mother still plays this and sings and performs once in a while, but she was also involved with lots of handicrafts and things, at the time, like macrame and crochet and sewing. And so for me growing up, I always felt like, I could do anything that I chose to do. And so I have a lot of diverse interests. This is my wife, Åsa Sandlund from Sweden. So we met on a work trip that I was traveling in Sweden doing glassblowing demonstrations with an Italian master glassblower. And we met and we were married in 1995. We had our 2 kids. Again, this is a very old photo, but this is them at the Ivor Salmon House in Seattle. So they're 18 and 20 at this point, and off to college and all that good stuff. But so, growing up, my main interest was playing music, and I still have a band to this day, which is kind of a native focus, a group that we call Kuik, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But this was basically what kept me from, developing my art to a very high degree. I was, really trying to make it as a musician, but in the end, it didn't really pan out for me musically, even though the music that I was playing was always sort of a funk rock style. And, there's a lot of the music that was getting signed out of Seattle was pretty guitar heavy, the grunge music. So we kind of got eclipsed by all of those big bands that were coming out of Seattle in the late 90s and early 2000. This is my buddy, Dante Marioni, who was the guy that introduced me to glassblowing. And I started in 1980. And here we are working with this Italian master glassblower, Lino Tagliapietro. And he's one of the guys who I give a lot of credit to as a teacher and a mentor, because he came from Italy and he spent a lot of time in the Northwest. And Dante and I worked very closely with him, and he shared with us, he was teaching a lot of people at the time, and we learned about how the Italians approach glassblowing, which is at the time was quite superior to how we understood glass making in the Seattle area and through Pilchuck Glass School. But the thing about glassblowing, I always like to point out, is that it's a very team-oriented activity. There's a lot of hands here, a lot of people working together. And in my mind, all that collective energy sort of goes into the work itself. And you need a team to work, to work with glassblowing. It doesn't, especially if you're making more complex pieces or very big pieces. So here is kind of some process shots that were shot at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington, which is a museum that has glassblowing on sort of on a regular basis, and you can tune in and watch live glassblowing. So, it took me a while to find the Tlingit way, as I like to put it. So my great grandmother did share with us a lot of information about where she came from, and stories and such. And so I grew up understanding that this was part of my background, but I didn't really have, really understand how to connect with it. And so I started in about 1988 to dabble in the form line design, which I basically had to learn from looking at books and sharing my work with other artists and looking for workshops that I could join in. Steve Brown was another guy that I worked with and learned from how to make make the form line designs. And once you do that, then of course we all know that there's a lot of freedom that can evolve out of understanding the rules and the architecture of the design, the form line design. So some of my earliest inspirations, I kind of turned into glass forms very naturally. This shadow effect is caused by carving into the thickness of the glass, and some of the areas are left unsandblasted, so it allows the light to transmit through the glass and then create this shadow effect, which was discovered purely by accident. And it was one of my aunties who came to see a little holiday open house that I had at the glass studio that I worked at, and she suggested, well, can we look at, usually the assistants in the studio, we'd have this holiday open house and we would have a little card table over in the corner. And the owner of the studio was named Benjamin Moore, and he had a nice area with pedestals and these beautiful, nice lights fixed above it. And so my aunt said, well, can we put this on the pedestal with the nice lighting? And so I said, sure. So we took Benjamin's piece down and I put the hat form up there, and about 10 people gathered around to see what was going to happen. And all of a sudden these shadows came through and everybody was like, oh, look at that. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I intended all along. That was kind of the eureka moment, that when I realized that this shadow effect is present in the work. And I like to think of it sort of as, kind of releasing the spirit of the piece. When the lighting is correct, then you get that effect. So anyway, that was what really kind of spurred me on and caused me to look at all kinds of different objects and trying to make things that would look like that. Like, this is my version of a grease dish here, working with these. And as my skills evolved, then of course I could do more and more complex things. These canoe paddles, I ended up getting a traditionally carved canoe paddle, and then I would cast this in glass. So this was like more of a kiln formed process, which is akin to lost wax casting for bronze making and sculpture and that type of thing. So after this form is cast and it's ground down and kind of cleaned up out of the mold, then I'll put a stencil on the surface of these pieces. In the case of this, you can see, the carved design up above. And so then what I do is take it into a sandblasting machine and then basically carve into the thickness of the glass. So just obviously looking at all kinds of objects from our culture, and then figuring out how to go about making this shape. And so in this case, this form was actually blown into a mold, and then I added these kind of appendages in the sculpture, little figure writing on the dorsal fin of that killer whale mask here, and then carving a little indentation in the mouth so I could inlay those glass teeth, which inspired by how operculum was used for teeth in masks. So, kind of looking at all of these objects and trying to become inspired by them. This is, more or less loosely based on a war helmet shape. and then the carving through layers of color in this case. So what I'll do is I'll create a thin layer of powdered colored glass on the surface of these pieces, and then with the stencil process, I can remove that outer layer of color, which in most cases is black. In the case of these pieces, to reveal the color underneath. So it's just a kind of a carving process. So of course, going into a form like this, like the oyster catcher rattle, this is quite a complex piece, for glass blowing, well, for wood carving too, but it involves making all these little elements in a separate session of glass making, glass forming, and then bringing them up to temperature in the kiln to about 1,000 degrees. And that is the point at which the glass will not break, like it won't fracture. So I can pick these elements back up and constitute them into a larger sculptural form. So this is actually about 20 inches tall. So that's how I've been spending my time trying to render these traditional objects in glass. So as more of a sculptural kind of presentation. They're obviously not very functional, but they're this piece in particular was kind of hand sculpted from poking from the inside of the bubble when it's hot, selectively heating it, and then pushing back to create this face in the glass. But then after which, then I do the carving once again to get the contrast of colors. And in the case of this, I added hair onto, so I drill holes into that form and then inlay the hair into the rattle. So an oyster catcher, or I'm sorry, a soul catcher here. And this is, made in kind of an exaggerated scale. It's about 20 inches long. But then trying to, figure out objects that were not related to crest symbols per se, but, in my mind, working with these forms kind of references the spirituality of our community. And so that's why I like to work with those forms. This is David Svensson. This is a guy that I met in 1988 when I first started dabbling in the form line design. And this guy became another important ally and friend to me. He'd spent several summers up in Haines, Alaska, at Alaskan Indian Arts, working with the Heinmillers and carving totem poles. And his father was from Southern California, John Svensson. So he'd sent Dave up to Haines for many summers in a row, and he was trained. He worked with a lot of great carvers up there, John Hagen and Wayne Price and others, Nathan Jackson. So he was one of the. So I met him at the Pilchuck Glass School. This is a photo of the school itself, where the glass making studios are. And so David actually had an idea to create a totem pole for the Pilchuck School. And there's many reasons why he was suggesting that, partly because John Halberg, who was one of the sort of a patron of the arts here in the Seattle area, was the heir to Weyerhaeuser. He was also a passionate Northwest Coast native art collector. And he donated his entire collection to the Seattle Art Museum. And there was one dagger that was a double-headed killer whale dagger that when he was doing all the research on his collection, they couldn't determine the provenance of that particular piece or how it was procured for his collection. So he decided to repatriate it to the Jacob family in Angoon. And so by giving this killer whale dagger back to the family, they adopted John Halberg and they gave him a Tlingit name. they named him Guchki-Yates, which means dark wolf. And so, as you know, for returning this object to the community, he was celebrated and honored. So so you can see here laying in the foreground, we asked permission from the Jacob family if we could carve a version of this in wood, and then we were going to make these glass castings that we're going to eventually inlay into the totem pole. So here's a couple of the objects that we're going to cast in glass and use it as elements in this totem pole. So as a class, so David and I taught a class surrounding the completion of this totem pole. And here's Wayne Price here and Judy Heinmiller. You can see Joe David in the very back there, who's a Nuu-chah-nulth carver, a very prominent carver out of Canada. Sean Peterson on the left with all the tattoos. But so we had several Native students in the class, and so we consulted with the elders from Klukwan. We told them of our intentions, that we wanted to make this totem pole, and we kind of got their blessings around it. And then we talked to the Jacob family, and we tried to connect with other people who were more or less connected with John Halberg and Dale Chihuly and Annie Gould Halberg, the three founders of the totem pole that are represented on the pole. This is pretty much my one and only contribution to that object, other than being a facilitator. I made this big glass hat that's going to sit on top of the totem pole. So here's some details from that totem pole. This is the face of Dale Chihuly, who was the artist behind the Pilchuck Glass School. He was the one who kind of paved the way for glass art on an international level. And so if anybody knows Dale Chihuly, he has a patch over one eye. But in this case, what we did is we did a glass kind of strip across the face of it. And so it becomes a glass element to this totem pole sculpture, and then it's going to be illuminated with neon. So here's the wolf Shakayat, which is the figure that is above John Halberg, who was the patron of the Pilchuck Glass School, and he donated the land to which Pilchuck is situated, and gave it to the school in perpetuity, so that we could always be there. And now Pilchuck is entering into its 50th year of existence. And we made this totem pole. It was the 30th year. So this was in 2001. So here you see the glass version of the double-headed killer whale dagger. So Charlie Jimmy and Verna Erickson came down from Klukwan, and they helped us with the installation ceremony. And then as a school, we all came together and carried this totem pole and had a kind of a somewhat traditional totem pole raising there on the campus. So you can see in the background, that's the glass studio. That's where all the students are working, making glass. And you can see the grass area where we were working on it, sort of feeding off the energy between the two projects. And it was really, for me, it was like, quite an experience, and almost like a rite of passage for me to some degree, because having brought this project to the Pilchuck School and having Tlingit carvers involved, and coming together in this kind of traditional way, and the sort of the traction that I was getting about my own work, attention for my own work, and also, connecting with Joe David, who I'll talk about as well. But here, David and I are climbing up this 20-foot totem pole and putting the hat on the top of the totem. And it's actually pretty cool, because that totem, after 20 years in the weather, has fared quite well. And I think it's because of that glass hat. that sits on top of it, protecting the end grain from the water. And it was kind of funny because everybody was making such a big deal about this hat, like, oh, Preston, how's the hat coming? And, you saw me working on it and blowing it and drawing on it and carving it and stuff. I said, oh yeah, I'm almost there. And Wayne Price comes back to me. He says, well, next time you need a hat stand, give me a call, because this was, this was kind of like, I had such a connection to the school, and it was a very special time for me. So here is the neon that is illuminating the glass elements within the totem. And so we used multicolored neon tubes so that depending on where you're standing, you catch different colors. It's sort of like, it's like the, it's kind of like the Northern Lights, or it's also kind of like illuminated abalone to some degree. So this was quite a cool project that I was really excited to be a part of at that time. So, when growing up in Seattle and, away from the Tlingit community, and not being raised with any religious instruction, I was always seeking and looking for things to learn from, art and, I don't know, philosophy. And so Carlos Castaneda was something that I always cite this, because he, his books were, partly fabricated stories about the shamanic sort of journeys and stuff, and the ability to navigate within his dream time was what he was being taught by this Mexican shaman, Don Juan. And a lot of the stuff has been sort of debunked and sort of discredited to some degree. But for me, it's as if it couldn't have been all completely untrue. These things kind of resonated with me, and like the whole idea of finding your hand within your dream time, that you could sort of navigate within your dreams as you could, like in your waking hours. But anyways, so that was something that led to me being very curious about psychology, and coming to Carl Jung was sort of, he was one of the, he did a lot of studies on dream analysis, and in terms of psychology, he was also among the more spiritual in that field of study. And so for a very short time, I read a couple of books about Jung psychology, and before I was, how much do you really want to know about the inner workings of the mind? There's a lot of interesting things there, but I think that all of these things kind of contributed to my natural curiosity about all things. I did for a period of time study Aikido, which is a martial art, which is also deeply rooted in Zen Buddhism. And so that sort of physical moving and, working with an opposing force in an opponent, like, you're practicing together, and it's a form of self-defense, but it's also, there's deeper philosophy behind Aikido, whereas you're not trying to bring, great harm to your opponent, that, it's as if they can't touch you, so you're able to defend yourself and deflect things, both mentally and physically. And so that also kind of contributed to my sort of spiritual awareness. But also I could relate to it very heavily, because when you're working with glass, you're actually working with an opposing force. The glass is molten, it's moving, and you have to move your body and manipulate your body to make this hot glass move in a certain way. So to me, it was kind of natural, this activity and the correlation between the two. It's just a personal kind of perspective, but it's something that really meant a lot to me. And later on, when I was working with Walter Porter, who was a man from Yakutat, he encouraged me to share these perspectives about these things that added to my development as an artist. And of course, Joseph Campbell is another one who, not a deep student of his work, but there's a lot of inspiration there. What little I've sort of looked at, and his work in comparative mythologies. Walter Porter also considered himself a mythologist, and he shared with me a lot of his perspectives on stories. There was about 12 stories that he had sort of gone very deep into, and was, creating lectures around his insights to the symbolism behind these stories, the Tlingit stories. So I always called Walter the Tlingit Joseph Campbell, and he, really, there was a period of time before he passed away that I was working with him quite regularly. And we were doing, presentations together, kind of bouncing off each other, my visual art and his, insights into the stories. And it gave me a lot of inspiration to create new artwork based on these insights to the stories. And this is Joe David, who I mentioned earlier. We met in the summer of 2000. And then in 2001 is when we did the totem pole for Pilchuck Glass School. But he also introduced me to the Sweat Lodge ceremony. And that was something that was quite impactful for me as well. And being as he was from the New Chanoth tribe on the west coast of Vancouver Island, he had been going to Sundance for many, many years, and was very, very involved with the Sundance ceremony. And so we built a sweat lodge up on the Pilchuck School, and we did a series of sweats up there. And then later he, at the end of 4 days, and this is the summer of 2000, we did 4 sweats, 4-hour-long ceremonies. And on the last one, he, that evening after our 4th sweat, he adopted me, shared his name with me, Kakawan Chief, which is a New Chanoth word. It means transforming killer whales. So for me, that kind of also was, because Joe is such a prominent artist himself, it kind of validated me to some degree, and he continues to help me with my form line and understanding aspects of it. So here's Joe. We've spent a lot of time collaborating with each other. This is a crystal, cast glass wolf skull that we made. Well, obviously this was for Joe. This was Joe's work. So all of this has sort of contributed to my ability to reach deeper into the process of glass making, and trying to bring it more into sort of a traditional Tlingit style, Northwest Coast style. And it's also very married together with modernism, modern art. The modern art movement is something that inspires me. The Surrealists, because of the Surrealists who were really interested in psychoanalysis and in context with their art. And that's really what kind of turned my head towards doing form line and glass, because the Surrealists held native art in very high regard. I already talked a little bit about Walter, but here's his picture, and some of you might have known him or had the good fortune of listening to one of his presentations. But so we met in the summer of 2004, and at that time I wanted to create an exhibition around Raven and the Box of Daylight, and I wanted it to be kind of an immersive experience. So this is the exhibition, and I'm not going to go too much into it because I've got a lot of other images to show you, but I was assuming that since I'm speaking to a lot of Tlingit tribal members and Northwest Coast people, you're knowledgeable of this story. But so this is the white raven. A raven was originally a white bird. Here's Raven going to the fisherman of the night and asking where's the daylight. So I created this sort of glass river and this little vignette. And so what I meant by sort of an immersive experience is there's video that's going on behind these backdrops. It's almost kind of like a diorama that was, the video is moving, and I wanted to create the atmosphere of the Northwest Coast. This is the old man who lives at the head of the Naas River. Naas Shakiyesh, I think is his name. And this is his daughter, who I learned, through speaking with people about this story, was that the daughter was transparent, signifying a supernatural being. Another detail I learned was when Raven goes to the old man and has to come in, and is shooed away. He transforms himself into a speck of dirt, and when the daughter goes out to collect water in the morning, they take her attendants take a feather and they draw this feather through the little cup of glass or bowl or ladle, and they find Raven as a speck of dirt. So here's Raven represented in this little sculpture. And so then Raven has to reformulate his plan because he doesn't, get into the clan house. So this time he deconstructs himself and turns himself into a hemlock needle. So this is the idea that Raven is changing form, and this mobile, kind of moves in space. And so, of course, we all know the daughter swallows the hemlock needle and she becomes pregnant. And this is the birthing pit, the area back behind the clan house that, was supposed to be born upon furs. And medicine woman says, oh, replace the furs with goat's beard moss. And so here's Raven kind of transforming in the belly of the woman. And so this is my iteration of Raven actually transforming into human form. So there's another video here that creates this kind of action sequence over this hat form, and then Raven kind of rising up and transforming into a human child. This is the clan house. This is the kind of like the idea that this is the the house, the long house that Raven is now inside because he's born into this world as a human child. And so here's the old man presiding over his wealth, his atu. So here are the boxes, and we all know what happens here. The boxes one by one are opened, and the far box is the stars, and the one that's more in the foreground is the moon, and the center is the box that contains the sun. And then along this back wall is sort of like this kind of universe or house front, and the clouds that are just kind of moving. The idea of the cosmos, the universe out there. So, okay, Raven's transforming back into into a bird, and then he's, the old man realizes he was tricked, and he's holding onto the tails of the Raven and holding him over the fire, and the soot from the fire turns Raven black, and he manages to escape. And then the people scatter into the different realms. And this is a Raven clan. This is a Thunderbird. So this is a bear, frog. So kind of representing all the different clan symbols from different regions. So this is a eagle hat. And so anyway, and then this back room, the lighting, it turns from sort of from dark to daylight. So, and then there's birds flying around and everything. So, and all throughout the entire exhibit is sound, music, the Tlingit language, telling the Raven story. So anyways, it's on tour. It's going to go to the Smithsonian in about a year's time, but somewhere between November and March of next year, it'll be at the Smithsonian. Then it'll go to Chrysler Museum, and a little bit on modernism, because this is another kind of thing that nudged me onto the path of what I do. I was reading a lot of books about contemporary native art, and there was a writer named Renard Strickland who wrote a book called Tonto's Revenge, and he wrote, it's ironic that the modernists, Jackson Pollock and Picasso and Henry Moore, artists like this, forced us to look at the primitive, the so-called primitive, and appreciate differing levels of reality. So when I started to read about modernism and primitivism, it's, that these artists were looking at older cultural styles. This is Giacometti was inspired by these African walking sticks. And so he made sculptures that were inspired by African art. Henry Moore, of course, this is, very modern kind of abstraction, but, in the same way as that, Northwest Coast form line is very abstract, and it's in some cases, sometimes you can have very small elements that represent a particular anatomy of an animal or a bird, or, it's maybe rearranged. So you're looking at a three-dimensional thing, but it's in two-dimensional form. So when I started to read this in the 80s, when I was trying to find my own way in glass, then I started to think, okay, well, maybe I could, become inspired by what the modernists were doing. So this is, this is a Picasso. And then, of course, you have to wonder, was this inspired by something that he saw, a Northwest Coast object or an African object here in this case? You got the Picasso on the left and an African helmet on the right. So I started to kind of play with those kinds of ideas and kind of turn the tables on the modernists, so to speak. So this was my sort of, Picasso reference here. This was a Brancusi, but so I started to make objects that were appropriating, the modernists in some small way. Here's eagle and raven. We got the eagle beak, pointing downwards. And you got the raven beak pointing downwards. You got the eagle on the top, and they share an eye. So, kind of playing with some abstractions there. This was a mosquito. There's the man who hunted the cannibal giant with his club, and there's a mosquito that's piercing through there. I called this one a hyacinth medicine amulet, which was Joe David's middle name was Hyacinth, so I wanted to, reference that to, talk a little bit about the spiritual connection of these little amulet forms that that we sometimes wear, little carved amulets. Crescent moon. This one's kind of inspired by a feather, so I'm looking for ways of abstracting a form and trying to make something new. So here we've got, could be an eagle and a raven here, a mussel shell. So sometimes I like to take these spare organic forms and just use them as a canvas to create, a new kind of design on it. This is, forget what this one was called, but, we've got the land otter on the left. And I think I called this one Surrounded by Spirits or something. And then trying to take the abstraction of a two-dimensional killer whale design and then try to render it in 3D. So, there's like one pectoral fin and one dorsal fin. It's got the tail, kind of playing with different abstractions here. Kind of volcano woman or fog woman. And then sometimes just returning to a very, basic playing with form line and creating, abstract form line, as Joe David likes to call it, wonderfully non-representational. So this is another whale form. So just trying to be real playful and try new things. This is some of the monumental works that I've done. This is a screen, the first large screen that I did for the Seattle Art Museum. And then I don't know if you're seeing me, but the pieces I made for the Museum of Glass were inspired by the pieces that I eventually made for the Sealaska Heritage with the Sobolov Center and inside the clan house there. Installation of the clan house are the Sobolov pieces here. The Raven Warrior. Those cast pieces weigh about 600 pounds each. So they're quite an endeavor, in terms of a glass object. So there you have the pieces there. Is the Tina cast glass again. And here it is installed in a private home with a backlit, that there's lights behind that illuminate the piece. Of course, the full-scale canoe paddles, the piece for the Museum of Glass. And then going back to Dave Svensson, my buddy. So, I don't carve wood myself. I work with other carvers and I help design the pieces. So this is a newer, one that was just recently completed. This is was cast in full scale. It's about 8 feet tall. This was the first one we did, which was a story of my great grandmother who had a pet grizzly bear as a child. As you can see, the grizzly bear cub up on the top. And so this was all cast in glass, solid glass front to back, and it weighed about 2,000 pounds in the case of this. So this is actually my great grandmother here. She's shown holding a tina copper form. We're just getting the pieces into place so that we can install them. And so this is going into a private home. So there you have that piece cast in full scale. And then this one here is the killer whale totem. As I'm eagle and killer whale, and then the Thunderbird is representing David Svensson's adopted clan, adopted by Tom Jimmy. And then at the bottom, you can see kind of almost like a soul catcher form, but then the face in the foreground is like, the wolf. But if you look at it on its side, it's got the little, like a double-headed wolf design there. The plastic model for scale. Here's the actual piece. This is actually 2,800 pounds of glass. It's been cast. This is my team. My accomplishments are not my own, but those of many. These are my team that has been helping me for 15 plus years. It's our workspace. It's a little bit different now. It's a lot more filled up with stuff. Some, my workstation for glass blowing. That's how we cut the stencil. So I'll draw those designs on there, and we cut the stencil, this rubber material out. And the areas that are now black that you can see inside the green are the areas that are going to be carved. They're carving through that black to reveal the color underneath. Again, kind of like a weaving technique to get texture into the form. And that's, well, so my back to my music passion. I wish I created a little video. I could have played some of the music for you, but I used to have a group called Little Big Band, kind of a native themed group, sort of soul, pop soul music. And Gene Tagaban is part of this group. But eventually this is Swill Canham, who's Lummi native from Washington State. James Luna is an amazing performance artist and visual artist, conceptual artist, but he passed away a few years ago. But now the new group Ku'ik, which means potlatch, of course, you might be aware. But this is Bernie Worrell. This was a man who was founder of the group Parliament Funkadelic. And so my whole musical genre style is funk jazz music. So this is one of our albums the first album we produced. And on this album is featured Clarissa Rizal. She was also part of the group, and Gene Tagaban were also Gene's still a member of the group. Of course, Clarissa unfortunately passed away, and so did Bernie Worrell, actually. They forgot they survived. This was our second album. And then this was our third album. We called it Heen, means water in the Tlingit language. So anyways, so we're a 10-piece group, and we're working on music all the time, and using spoken word, storytelling, Tlingit, Haida language. And the fourth album is actually going to be featuring Philip Blanchette from Pamua. And so he's going to be singing Yupik on that fourth album that will be coming out sometime next year. Stanton Moore is an amazing jazz drummer out of New Orleans in the funk group Galactic. Captain Rob is a Blackfoot tribal member. He and I collaborate quite a bit and write a lot of the music together. And so in any case, this is something that is like my passion. There's Clarissa, and she was performing with us one time. Anyways, and Bernie when he was still alive. But so yeah, we're always writing music. We've got a fourth triple album that's ready to come out, and then we've got a whole batch of new songs that we want to go into the recording studio and perform. And this is the cover of the fourth album. The word wooch means the people came together in Tlingit, and the whole idea about this is Bernie's final collaborative project before he died. And he had this kind of philosophy of what he called woo, like the woo of the music, the wooing of people through the sonic healing of music, and all of this music that he helped us create. We made this hybrid word, and that'll be the album forthcoming. And the whole Afrofuturism and Native futurism is kind of present in this album in terms of commentary on human relations, and so look for that. There's all the information if you want to look at more of my work on my website. I've got a blog, or I've got, you can follow me on Facebook, or Kuik, you can follow on Facebook, and be all up to speed on that if you like. And that's my presentation. So I want to say Gunesh Cheesh, and thank you for tuning in. And I know I went kind of long. I kind of assumed that was going to happen, but I am willing to stay on longer and take some questions if there are any. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And let's see, there we go.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Back. Okay. So our first question was pretty early into your presentation about the soul catcher blown. Was it shaped first before sandblasting, or is it from a mold?
Well, first it starts as like a cylinder, and then what I'll do is I'll actually carve all the way through the thickness of the glass to create that form. And then I'll have to, kind of grind the edges. It's a little bit rough from the sandblasting carving process. And then what I'll do is I'll cover it with the rubber tape, and I'll draw the designs on it and carve it a second time, carve the designs into it. So it's a multi-stage process.
Thank you. Next, someone commented about people having apprenticed with you in the past. And do you still do that? And how would someone interested in doing an apprenticeship reach out?
I don't really do apprenticeships. I did one through SHI. I don't know. It's really tough to bring people up to speed. I mean, I would be willing to consider it. I would just have to find the right person, honestly. There's so much that I'm trying to accomplish in the studio. I'm pretty much got my team worked out, but I wouldn't be completely opposed to the idea of bringing an apprentice on. I just haven't found the time or the right person quite yet.
Thank you. Our next question is there an art piece in particular that was instrumental in putting you on the track to work with glass as a medium?
Well, those hat forms, I kind of explained the story of the hat forms, and so in my mind, like every artist comes to kind of a fork in the road, where, you go left or right. And for me, after I started making those hat forms, and then it wasn't until like, I don't know, 1997 or something that I finally had a significant show with all of my form line style pieces. And I had an exhibition, and I sold most of the show. And it wasn't really like that. It wasn't that great of work. I mean, it was a lot of stuff I, copied out of books, and was just really trying. But people looked at the work, and I think they realized that there was something more personal going on. And so with that success of that show, I started to build on that. And so then I started to work more and more and more on the Tlingit inspired pieces. And that's what led me to my ultimate success, I think, in the end. I mean, I already had a pretty, 15, 16 years of glass blowing behind me before I really started to push the form line style work. And then once I started doing that, then I kind of already brought you up to speed, like what I was doing in 2000, meeting Joe David, in 2001, making the Pilchuck totem pole. And that really kind of, and then also going down to Santa Fe, where there's a lot of contemporary Native art that is being highlighted down there. And they have such a collector base, and it wasn't easy in the beginning because I was from the Northwest, and here I am in the Southwest all of a sudden. And then I'm also with, trying to sell glass sculpture. Ceramic pots are the big thing down there, because of the traditional pot forms. And so It took me a couple of years, and then we started doing glass blowing demonstrations down there. So I had a friend who had a portable glass studio, and he would drive it from Seattle down to Santa Fe, and then we would show people how we made this stuff. And then it was just like people like got it all of a sudden, and then they realized how much work goes into it, and they could sort of understand more about it. So it was an education process, but over the years it's really kind of kicked in, and now there's one of the guys that I know who's been blowing glass the longest, native guy, is a Pueblo, Isleta Pueblo, and he has been showing down there in that market for years. And now there's more and more natives that are using glass as a material. And so, yeah, it's just a building process. And, you can't escape the time that it takes to become good at any one thing. And I still consider myself a student of form line. I don't think that my designs are, they could be more masterful. I mean, I'm very humble when it comes to that. I still have a lot to learn, and yet I keep trying best I can to make it look, and honor the tradition, honor the elders, and but also finding a new pathways for new materials, and I think that that's really what has me and others have done. Glass is not a traditional medium, but the more we use it, the more traditional it will become.
Thank you very much. You kind of touched a little bit on the next question I have here, which is when creating form line design or 3D mask or totem style for glass, are there certain design choices that you have to make differently because of how glass as a medium works differently than, say, wood or canvas?
Yeah, well, you can see with the cast totems that I can cast from those traditional wood carving, as long, actually, it doesn't matter if there's undercuts either, because it's a lost wax process. So what happens is when you make a wax positive of a piece of wood, so it goes, a series of mold making processes, and then you're able to render a wax positive. You cast the plaster around the wax, you melt the wax out, and then you load the glass into the open face mold, and then you turn the kiln on, and the glass just melts into the form. When you break the plaster away, then you're left with kind of the sculptural, which resembles the original very closely. With the glass blowing techniques, yeah, there are some limitations, and so I can't make really small things as easily. It's more, I can get more detail into more of a piece that's about 18 inches long, and so there. But so I try, a lot of the, like the soul catcher, in its exaggerated form, it becomes kind of a sculpture unto itself. And so that's kind of the trick, and that's why I'm looking to all kinds of other different kinds of forms. Like when I talked about the modernism and the influences there, those, just trying to play with new new approaches. And sometimes I'll see a piece or an element in a 2D design or a sculpture, and then I'll think, oh, what would that look like if it was like 10 times larger or whatever. And then sometimes I can find a new form there. So it's kind of not a traditional, but in its abstraction, it is kind of traditional.
Thank you very much. Our final question of the day is there anything you haven't had a chance to share yet that you want to mention before we finish?
Well, in regards to teaching, and I mean, I had a friend of mine who asked me at one point. He goes, "How do you know?" This was Swill Canham, the guy with the violin. You know, he's a storyteller and very knowledgeable Lummi tribal member. And he says, like, how did you allow yourself to get so successful? And I was like, well, that's weird. I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I don't know what you mean by it. Anyway, so we were like off to a baseball game and having a jolly good time. And I always thought about it. And then, about a year later, I said, Swill Canham, I said, one time you asked me, this question, I didn't know how to answer it. And it's like, how did I allow myself to get so successful? And he goes, oh no, I've already answered it for you. And I said, okay, so what's my answer then? And he said, well, some of us are just out there and you don't realize it, but you're changing people's views and perspectives on, with your artwork. And so, I said, even though, I mean, I do put myself out as a teacher on occasion, mostly in the glass context. Like I'll be teaching at the Pilchuck Glass School next spring, hopefully, if we're allowed to run classes at the Pilchuck School. Though the collaborations, when I'm working with an artist who's very established, then I try to show them, what the possibilities are. And just by the nature of working with other artists and it always tends to be on this kind of higher level. But, I've tried to convince Sealaska Heritage that they should open up a glass school in Juneau, whereas, I could help create like a cottage industry, blowing into little forms and, training people to handle the material of glass like I did. Like I started in a production factory and I worked as an assistant for, 15 years, and it wasn't until like 20 years later that I got achieved, the recognition that I'm still, getting today. But so I would just say to people who want to have a career in the arts, I says, I say you gotta work hard. I mean, I work 6-7 days a week. I work for people for free just so I could gain experience. I put myself out there, and I think that's what artists today need to do. That they need to work hard. You can't expect it to just be there. Even if you're a native person, I mean, just because you're Tlingit, you still have to work hard and learn from as many people as you can, and check your work and ask opinions and be humble and be brave, just, don't have, this, you have to be vulnerable and you have to accept criticism. You have to hear it, you have to learn it, you have to try to get better. And so that's my little pep talk. I hope that people take that the right way, that they can always push yourself. It's the only way that you're going to be able to bring yourself up to the next level. And our people, our community, we need that. We need really good artists, to be coming up. We need people to keep these stories and symbols alive, and we need that. So, get out there and do hard work, and have a great day.
All right, we have actually one more question. Someone snuck in a question at the last second here. Is there anything that you haven't created yet, which you'd like to create, and what has prevented you from making it?
Well, I don't know. I guess, I can't underemphasize the whole idea of the music that I do. I'd like to create like a theatrical musical experience with the people that I collaborate with, to kind of talk about, I mean, everybody in my group is so talented. They have a really diverse experience, from theater to traditional storytelling to acting to composing. And so that's the one thing that I'm wanting to develop right now. That's kind of where my head's at, because I've always wanted to. I love the synergy of playing music, and right now it's just excruciating because we can't get out there and play. We did a live stream last Saturday, and we'll probably restream it on like my music website. But I think that would be really fun to work. I mean, I was thinking like a Cirque du Soleil kind of experience, maybe not with acrobats, but like theatrics and storytelling, and kind of talk about, the urban and the traditional native experience, all with this sort of backdrop, this music that we're creating. So that's the one thing that has stopped me, the funding for that kind of thing is, getting, some kind of funds together that would create, for 10 people to work on a project like this that we could take and tour on the road or something. But, with the visual arts, that's something that I do every day. It's like, I work in my studio 5 days a week, and I'm always making stuff, and I'm always producing things and experimenting, and that's pretty. That's just what I do. And then the music is where I'm trying to like make some forward gains with that, but that's all I can think of right now.
Gunachchish, Preston, for sharing your story, your knowledge, and your experiences. We have 4 more lectures coming up during the month of October. You can find the full schedule and topics at our website, sealaskaheritage.org, on our news page. Our next one is Thursday, October 22nd, with Crystal and Rico Worrell discussing Artist's Life 2020 at noon to 1 p.m. Alaska time. Thank you again, Preston Singletary, and have a good day.